The whole arena laughed when they pushed me into that boxing ring. 12,000 people, give or take, roaring with laughter at the sight of me. A soft, middle-aged man in a polo shirt and his good jeans, standing in a championship ring across from the most feared fighter in the world. I had no business being in there. Everybody knew it. The laughter rolled down from the cheap seats in a wave, and I stood there with my face burning, wanting to disappear, having climbed into that ring for one reason and one reason only, which was that my 8-year-old son was in the third row, and he was the one who'd gotten me up there, and I could not climb back out in front of him. And then the champion, the king himself, walked across the ring toward me to give the crowd the show they'd paid for. And he got up close enough to see my face under those lights. And he stopped. And the laughter died, because something was wrong with the way he was standing there. And this man, this champion, this terror of the boxing world, took off his gloves, dropped them on the canvas, and in front of 12,000 people, his eyes filling up, he said one word. He said, "Coach, I'm going to tell you the whole story, who I am to that man, and what happened in that ring, and what my son found out about his father that night. But before I do, let me just say this plain, because I'm not a fancy man and I won't dress it up. This is a story about the people who shape us when we're nobody, and what we owe them, and what it looks like when one of us actually pays it back. If that's a story you'd like to hear, go ahead and subscribe, and stay with me to the end. It's worth it. Let me start about 17 years ago, in a beat-up little gym that doesn't exist anymore. My name is Otis Greer. I'm 46 years old, and these days I drive a delivery route and raise my boy. But there was a time, years ago, when I ran a gym. Not a fancy one, a free one. A little youth boxing gym in a rough part of town, the kind of place a city forgets it has, in a building that was always too cold in winter and too hot in summer, with second-hand equipment and a heavy bag patched with duct tape. I wasn't a fighter myself, not really, not a good one. What I was a man who believed that a kid with nowhere to go and too much anger in him needed somewhere to put it. That wasn't the streets. So I kept that gym open on a shoestring and a prayer, mostly out of my own thin pocket, and I let the neighborhood's hardest kids come in off the corner and hit something that wasn't a person, and I tried, in my small way, to give them somewhere to belong before the streets claimed them. I should tell you why a man does a thing like that, runs himself into the ground keeping a free gym open for other people's hard luck kids, because it isn't charity exactly, and it isn't sainthood. The truth is, I knew those boys because I had been one. I grew up in that same neighborhood, with that same anger, on that same road, and the only reason I didn't end up dead or locked up was that one old man, when I was a kid, ran a gym just like the one I'd end up running, and he let me in when nobody else would have me. He never made a big speech about it. He just gave me a place to be and something to hit and a reason to come back tomorrow, and that was enough to keep me alive until I grew up enough to save myself. I never forgot it. And when I was grown, I swore I'd be that for somebody else. So that gym wasn't a good deed I did. It was a debt I was paying to a man who was long gone, paying it forward the only way you can pay that kind of debt, which is to the next kid down the line. I tell you that so you understand. I never once felt like a hero in that gym. I felt like a man passing along the one thing that had saved him. That's all I ever was. A link in a chain. I'm a single dad now. My boy Reggie is 8. His mother, my wife, passed a few years back, and it's been Reggie and me ever since, and that boy is my whole heart. And Reggie, like a lot of boys his age, had a hero. He was crazy, absolutely crazy, about boxing, and most of all about the heavyweight champion of the world, a man the whole sport called the King, Andre Kingsley. Reggie had the poster on his wall. He had the shirt. He'd watch the King's fights over and over and shadowbox along in the living room. The King was the biggest thing in my little boy's world. And here's the thing my son did not know, the thing I had never told him, the thing I'd never told much of anybody. I knew Andre Kingsley. I knew him before he was the King. I knew him when he was a hungry, furious, broken 16-year-old kid, and that beat-up little gym of mine was the place that kept him alive long enough to become what he became. Let me tell you about the boy Andre was, because the whole world only knows the man. He came into my gym 17 years ago, when he was 16 and I was 29, and he did not come in looking for salvation. He came in looking for trouble. He was already half lost, no father anywhere in the picture, a mother fighting her own battles, running with a crowd that was going to get him killed or locked up before he was 20, which was the road every sign pointed him down. He'd started coming around my gym at first just to cause problems, him and his crew, mouthing off, trying to look hard. The other men told me to throw him out. There was a version of me that would have. But I saw something in that angry kid. I'd seen it before, in kids like him. Underneath all that fury was just a boy who was scared and hungry and had decided somewhere along the line that nobody was ever going to love him, so he might as well be feared instead. And I knew, because I'd watched it happen to other boys, exactly where that road ended. So I didn't throw Andre out. Instead, I did the one thing nobody had ever done for him. I told him he could stay. I gave him a job sweeping the gym, a few dollars a week I couldn't really spare. I started feeding him because it became clear pretty quick that the kid wasn't eating regular. I'd make extra and just leave it out, casual, like it was no big thing so he could eat without it being charity. You have to be careful, feeding a proud, hungry kid. You can't ever let it look like pity, because a boy like Andre would rather starve than be pitied. The pride is sometimes the only thing he's got left. So, I got good at it, the art of feeding a kid without him having to admit he was hungry. I'd buy too much and say I didn't want it to go to waste. I'd say, "Hey, do me a favor and finish this off. My wife will kill me if I bring it home." I'd leave a sandwich on the bench like I'd forgotten it. And that boy would wait until he thought I wasn't looking, and he'd eat like he hadn't eaten in days, which he often hadn't. And I'd pretend not to see, because letting him keep his dignity was as important as filling his stomach, maybe more. That's a thing the world doesn't teach you, how to give to somebody without taking their pride in exchange. I learned it from that old man with the gym, the one who fed me the same careful way 30 years before. You'd be amazed how much of saving a kid is just making sure he gets fed without ever having to say the words out loud. And little by little, that furious boy started to settle, because it turned out Andre Kingsley had a gift. The second I put gloves on that kid and pointed him at the heavy bag, I knew. I'd been around boxing my whole life and I had never seen natural ability like that, not ever. The boy was going to be something. But more than the gift, what that kid needed was somebody to believe he was worth something. And for whatever reason, God put me in that gym to be the one who did. I want to tell you about one night in particular, because it's the night everything could have gone the other way. Andre was about 17 by then. Something had happened on his block. One of his old crew had been hurt, badly, and there was going to be retaliation, and Andre was right in the middle of it. Fired up, ready to go do something that would have ended his life one way or the other, prison or the grave. And he came to the gym that night not to train, but to say goodbye, really, though he didn't say it like that, and I could see it on him, what he was about to go do, and I did the only thing I could think of. I locked the gym door, and I sat that boy down, and I talked to him the whole night. The whole night, Andre, until the sun came up. I told him I knew exactly who he could be and that it wasn't this. I told him that the world was going to try to make him into a statistic, and that the most rebellious, hardest thing he could possibly do was refuse. I told him I'd never had a son, and that if I did, I'd want him to be like the kid I saw underneath all that armor. I begged him, honestly, not to throw his life away. And somewhere around dawn, that boy broke down and cried in my arms like the child he still was, and he didn't go do the thing. He stayed. And that morning is the only reason there is a king at all. He's told me since that if I hadn't locked that door, he'd be dead. I believe him. I think about that night more than any other, and I'll tell you what I've learned from it, because it's the whole secret of the thing. I didn't say anything magic to Andre that night. There were no perfect words. I just refused to let him be alone with the worst version of himself for one more hour. That's it. That's the whole trick. When a kid is standing on the edge of throwing his life away, he doesn't need a lecture and he doesn't need a program and he doesn't need somebody to fix him. He needs one person to sit with him in the dark and not leave, to be a wall between him and the cliff, just for one night, until the worst of it passes. Most kids who go over the edge don't go because they're bad. They go because in the one moment that mattered, there was nobody in the room. I just made sure that for Andre, in his moment, there was somebody in the room. Anybody can do that. You don't need to be a saint or a trainer or a hero. You just need to be willing to lock the door and stay. The hardest and most important thing I ever did was simply not leave a scared boy alone on the worst night of his life. It cost me a night's sleep. It bought the world a champion. That's the math of it, and it humbles me every time I run it. So, that's who I was to Andre Kingsley. Not his trainer exactly. When he got good enough, real professional people came in and took over the boxing part the way it works, and I was glad of it, because they could take him further than I ever could. I was something else. I was the man who kept him alive and believed in him when believing in him made no sense to anybody. And when the real trainers and the managers and the money came, Andre got swept up into another world, the world of arenas and championships and fame, and I just stayed where I was, running my little gym, proud of him from a distance, and we drifted. I want to be honest about that because people always ask. It wasn't a falling out. There was no bad blood, it was just life, and the enormous gravity of fame, which pulls a person up and away from everything that came before, not out of cruelty, but just out of how it works. Andre got famous, and his life became impossibly big and fast and far away, and my life stayed small and slow and right where it had always been. The phone calls got further apart, and then they stopped. I never reached out to ride his coattails. That wasn't in me, never could be. I'd done what I did for that boy because it was right, not to collect on it later. So I let him go, and I followed his career in the newspapers and on the television like everybody else, and I cheered for him from my couch, and I never once told a single soul that the king had swept the floors of my gym, because it would have felt like bragging on something that was never mine to brag about. I won't lie and tell you the drifting didn't hurt, because it did, in a quiet way that I mostly kept to myself. There were nights watching him on the television, lifting a belt over his head in front of the whole world, that I'd feel this complicated ache. Pride so big it brought tears, tangled up with a loneliness I was ashamed of. I'd think, that's my boy, that's the kid who cried in my arms at dawn, and look at him now. And then the camera would cut away and the room would be quiet and it would just be me on my couch, and I'd think, he doesn't even know I'm watching. But I never let that ache turn into bitterness, and I'm proud of that because bitterness would have meant I did it for the wrong reasons. I didn't save Andre to be remembered. I saved him because he needed saving. The day you start keeping score on your kindness, expecting it to be repaid, you've turned it into something else, something smaller. So I swallowed the ache and I kept it clean. I'd done right by that boy, and that was the whole of my reward. And if he never thought of me again, then that was all right, because the love was never alone. I want to be clear about that, because it's the heart of everything. I had made my peace, completely, with never being thanked, which is maybe why what happened in that ring undid me the way it did. Eventually, the gym closed. The money ran out, the way it always does for places like that, and the building got sold, and I had to find regular work, and I did, and life went on. I met Reggie's mother, and we had Reggie, and then I lost her, and it became just me and my boy. And all the while, my son grew up worshiping a man named the King, with no idea on this earth that his own father was the reason that man existed. I never told him. I don't fully know why. Part of it was that humility I can't seem to shake, and part of it, if I'm honest, was that it hurt a little, the drifting, and it was easier not to poke at it. So Reggie had his hero, and I had my secret, and that's how things stood the night I took my boy to see the King fight in person, as a birthday surprise, the best present I could scrape together. I'd saved up for those tickets for months. They were nosebleed seats way up high, but Reggie didn't care. His hero was going to be in the same building, in the flesh, and my boy was so happy I thought he might levitate. But it turned out the night wasn't just a fight. Before the main events, there was a whole promotional spectacle, a charity thing, and part of it was a bit the King's camp did for the crowd. A piece of showmanship where the champion would call up an ordinary person from the audience to spend a minute in the ring with him, clowning around, letting the regular Joe throw a few harmless punches at the champ's gloves while the crowd ate it up. It was good fun mostly. A little humiliating for whoever got picked, but good-natured. The king's people would scan the crowd and pick somebody, and the spotlight started roaming the arena, and the announcer was working the crowd up, and somewhere in the chaos, my Reggie, my proud, excited 8-year-old boy, stood up on his chair and pointed at me and started screaming at the top of his lungs, "My dad! Pick my dad! My dad's the toughest! Pick my dad!" Just a little boy who thought his father was the strongest man alive, the way little boys do, wanting his dad to get to meet the king. And the spotlight found us. And it found my son screaming, and it found me, this soft middle-aged man in a polo shirt being volunteered by his kid, and the announcer laughed and said something like, "Well, this young man says his dad's the toughest. Let's get Dad down here." And the whole arena turned to look, and 12,000 people roared with laughter at the very idea of me, and there was no way out of it. Because my son was looking at me with the purest joy I'd ever seen on his face, certain his dad was about to go be a hero. I could not say no to that. So I swallowed every bit of my pride, and I made my way down all those stairs while the crowd hooted, and I climbed into that ring. And let me tell you, standing in a championship ring under those lights with 12,000 people laughing at you is about the longest, loneliest walk a man can take. I felt every one of my 46 years, and every pound I'd put on, and every ounce of how ridiculous I looked. The announcer was playing it for laughs, getting the crowd to laugh harder. I just kept my eyes on the canvas and told myself it would be over in a minute, that I'd take my son's joy home with me, and that was worth any humiliation. And I want to be honest about that walk down the stairs and into the ring, because there's a particular shame in being laughed at by a crowd that has nothing in particular against you, that's just laughing because you're an easy target, because you're soft and ordinary and don't belong. It's not cruel, exactly. It's worse than cruel in a way. It's careless. 12,000 people deciding in a glance that you're nothing, that you're a punchline, and laughing without a second thought. I felt about 2 inches tall. Every step down those stairs I wanted to turn and run, and the only thing that kept my feet moving was the face of my son, lit up like the 4th of July, certain beyond all doubt that his dad was about to be magnificent. A father will walk through fire and laughter and his own crumbling pride to keep that look on his boy's face for one more minute. So I walked, and I climbed through those ropes, and I stood there and took the laughter, and I told myself it would cost me nothing but my dignity, and that I'd traded that away for my son before, and would do it 1,000 times again. I had no idea, none at all, what was about to happen. I thought the humiliation was the whole story. I was about 60 seconds from learning how wrong I was. And then the king himself came across the ring to do the bit. I hadn't even let myself really look at him. I'd been so busy being mortified. But now he was coming toward me, this enormous, magnificent champion, putting on his show face for the crowd, raising his gloves, playing it up, and he got in close, leaning in to set up whatever bit of clowning he had planned, and he looked at my face, up close, under those bright lights for the first time, and he froze. I watched it happen. I watched the show face fall right off him. I watched this man, this champion in front of 12,000 screaming people go completely still, staring at me, and I saw the years rolling backward behind his eyes. 17 years, a beat-up gym, a hungry kid, a locked door, a long night, a man who believed in him. I saw him see me, really see me, and the whole arena started to get confused because the champion was just standing there, frozen, and the laughter was sputtering out, and nobody understood what was happening. And in that strange suspended moment, with the king frozen in front of me and 12,000 people falling quiet without knowing why, something passed between Andre and me that I don't have good words for. Because I was looking at his face too, now, really looking, for the first time since he'd been a boy. And under the fame and the muscle and the championship, I could still see him, the scared 16-year-old, the kid who cried at dawn, the boy I'd fed sandwiches he pretended not to need. He was in there still, looking out at me through the eyes of the most famous man in the building. And I think, in that moment he was 16 again, and I was 29 again, and we were back in that cold little gym, and none of the years or the fame or the distance existed at all. There's a kind of love between a man and the boy he saved that doesn't fade and doesn't care how much time has passed. It just waits. And it had been waiting in both of us for 17 years. And it all came flooding back into that ring at once, and I felt my own eyes start to burn, and I knew, before he said a single word, that he remembered everything. And the king reached up and pulled off his gloves, one and then the other, and let them drop to the canvas. And his eyes filled up with tears, right there in front of the whole world. And in a voice that shook, this giant of a man, he said, "Coach? Coach Otis?" And I said, "Hey, Andre, look at you. Look at what you became." And that man, the heavyweight champion of the world, the king, the most feared fighter alive, wrapped his arms around me in the middle of that ring and broke down crying into my shoulder like the 17-year-old boy I'd held at dawn all those years ago. And 12,000 people went absolutely silent, not understanding, watching their champion weep on a middle-aged stranger in a polo shirt. And then Andre let me go, and he wiped his face, and he walked over and he took the microphone from the stunned announcer. And he turned to that whole silent arena, and he got himself together, and this is more or less what he said. I'll never forget it. He said, "I need everybody to stop laughing. Right now. Because you don't know who this man is." He had to stop and breathe. 17 years ago, I was a 16-year-old kid with no father and no future, headed straight for a prison cell or a coffin, and everybody who looked at me saw exactly that. A lost cause, a bad kid, somebody to laugh at or be scared of. Everybody except one man. This man. Otis Greer. He ran a little free gym in my neighborhood, and when I came in there to cause trouble, when every other adult in my life had already given up on me, this man fed me. He gave me a job. He believed I was somebody when I had every reason and every intention of becoming nobody. The arena was dead silent now. 12,000 people. You could have heard a pin drop. There was a night, Andre went on, his voice cracking, when I was 17, when I was about to go do something that would have ended my life. And this man locked the door of his gym and sat up with me until the sun came up and talked me out of it. He saved my life that night. Not a figure of speech. He literally saved my life. Everything I am, every belt, every dollar, every bit of all of this, every single bit of it exists because Otis Greer refused to give up on a kid that the whole rest of the world had already thrown away. And I let us lose touch. I got famous, and I got swept up, and I let the best man I ever knew slip out of my life, and I have regretted it every single day, and I never knew how to find my way back. And then he turned to me and he said, in front of all of them, "And I almost let you get laughed at in my ring. The man who made me. I am so sorry, Coach, for the laughing, for the years, for all of it. I'm sorry." I couldn't speak. I just shook my head because there was nothing to be sorry for, not really. And then Andre looked out into the crowd and he said, "Where's the boy who pointed?" He said this was his dad. And the spotlight swung over to Reggie, my Reggie, standing on his chair with his mouth hanging open, this small boy who'd just watched the king of the whole world weep on his father and call him the man who made him. And Andre Kingsley pointed up at my son and he said, into the microphone, for the whole arena to hear, "Young man, you said your dad was the toughest man here. You were right. You were more right than you could possibly know. Your daddy is the strongest man in this building, and it isn't even close. Everybody in here, on your feet. On your feet right now for Mr. Otis Greer." And 12,000 people who had been laughing at me 60 seconds earlier rose to their feet and roared. But it was a different sound now. It was thunder. It was respect. It washed over me in that ring, and I just stood there and wept. And up in the third row, my little boy was screaming and crying and jumping up and down, watching the entire world stand up and roar for his father. I found his face in the crowd, my Reggie, and the look on it is the thing I'll carry to my grave. Because here was a little boy who, an hour earlier, thought his dad was just his dad, the guy who drove a delivery truck, who made his breakfast, who was strong in the ordinary way. All dads are strong to their kids. And in the space of 2 minutes, that boy had watched the most famous man on the planet, his own personal hero, the king, weep on his father's shoulder, call his father the man who made him, and order 12,000 people to their feet to honor him. My son was learning, live, in real time, in front of the whole world, that his father was somebody, that the quiet, ordinary man who tucked him in at night had a secret greatness in him, a greatness made entirely out of kindness, that the whole world was suddenly standing up to salute. And I thought, watching him watch me, that whatever that night cost me in laughter and shame on the way down those stairs, it had bought something I could never have bought him any other way. The knowledge, burned into him forever, that his dad was a good and important man. There is no ticket price on that. I'd have walked into 100 rings full of laughing strangers to give my boy that. Now, I have to tell you what happened after, because the moment in the ring, as overwhelming as it was, isn't actually the best part. The best part is what Andre did with it. Because a lesser man could have made that a beautiful moment and then gone right back to his enormous life and let me slip away again. A lot of people, caught up in emotion, mean every word and then forget you by Monday. But that's not what Andre did. After the event, his people brought me and Reggie back to see him, and the first thing that giant did was get down on the floor, to be eye level with my son, and he spent 20 minutes with Reggie, just talking to him, asking him about himself, signing his shirt, treating my boy like he was the most important person Andre had ever met. And I watched my son's entire universe rearrange itself, because his hero turned out to be his dad's old friend, which meant his dad was somebody his hero loved. And then Andre and I talked, really talked, for the first time in 17 years, and he told me something that stayed with me. He said the worst thing fame had done to him wasn't the obvious stuff, the money or the pressure. It was that it had slowly convinced him he'd done it all himself. Surrounded by people telling him he was the greatest, the king, a self-made man, he'd started to believe it, started to forget the cold gym and the sandwiches and the locked door, started to think he'd risen on his own gifts alone. And he said that the instant he saw my face in that ring, the whole lie collapsed, and he remembered all at once that he had never been self-made, not for 1 second, that he'd been made by a poor man in a polo shirt who fed him in secret and refused to let him die. He said it was the most important thing that had happened to him in years, that ring, because it gave him back the truth about himself, which is that nobody, no matter how high they climb, ever got there alone. There's always a notice at the bottom of the ladder, holding it. He'd just forgotten, the way the successful so often do, and a boy pointing from the 3rd row gave him back the memory. And then Andre sat down with me and he said, "Coach, I'm not going to lose you again. I lost you once, and it's the biggest regret of my life. So here's what we're going to do." And he told me he wanted to reopen my gym. Not just give me money, he knew me too well for that, knew I'd be uncomfortable with a handout. He wanted to rebuild the actual gym, the free youth gym, in our old neighborhood, and he wanted me to run it. He said, "There are 1,000 kids out there right now exactly like I was, and they need an Otis Greer, and there's only one of those, and I've been wasting him driving a delivery truck." He wanted to fund it completely, forever, but he wanted my name nowhere on the marketing because he knew I'd hate that. He just wanted me in that gym every day doing the thing I was put on this earth to do, saving the next Andre, and the one after that. And I said yes. Of course I said yes. They reopened that gym and I run it now, and every single day I get to do the work I thought I'd lost forever, the work that matters more than anything, catching kids before the streets do. The next Andre Kingsley is in my gym right now, somewhere, some furious, scared kid who thinks nobody will ever love him, and I get to be the one who tells him he's wrong. Andre gave me back my purpose. That's worth more than any amount of money he could have handed me, and he was wise enough to know it. You have to understand what it is to lose your purpose and then have it handed back to you. When that gym closed all those years ago, I told myself I was just changing jobs, but the truth is, something in me went quiet that I thought was gone for good. Driving that delivery route, I was a fine enough man, a good father, but I wasn't doing the thing I was made for, and a part of me knew it and grieved it without ever saying so. And then Andre opened those doors again and put me back in that gym. And the first morning I unlocked it and smelled the canvas and the sweat and heard the bags. I stood there in the middle of the floor, and I wept like a child, because I was home, because I was useful again in the one way that mattered most to me. There are kids coming through those doors now who would have been lost, and they're not going to be, because there's an Otis Greer in the gym again. Every one of them is a life that goes a different direction now. That's what Andre gave back to me. Not comfort, not money. He gave me back the man I was supposed to be. I don't know a greater gift one person can give another. But here's the part that means the most to me, the part I think about at night. Andre Kingsley is in my son's life now. The king. Reggie's hero. He comes around when his schedule allows, and he's become a kind of uncle to my boy, a mentor, another grown man who loves him and looks out for him. And do you understand what that means? It means the kid I saved all those years ago is now helping me raise my own son. The boy I refused to give up on grew into a man who shows up for my Reggie. The kindness I put out into the world 17 years ago came all the way back around to take care of my own child. I don't have the words for what that does to a father's heart. You cast your bread on the water, the old book says, and after many days it comes back to you. It took 17 years, but it came back. It came all the way back. And I've thought a lot about why it came back, because plenty of kindness never does, and I don't want to pretend I'm owed some cosmic reward for being decent. I don't think it works like that, like a vending machine where you put goodness in and a prize comes out. Most of the good I've done in my life I'll never see the end of, and that's fine. That's how it's supposed to be. But every once in a while the circle closes where you can see it, and you get to watch the seed you planted become a tree. And I think when that happens, it's not a reward so much as a kind of mercy, a glimpse, God letting you see just once what your small quiet life was actually for. I got to see it. I got to watch a scared, hungry boy I fed in secret grow into a king, and then watch that king kneel down on a floor to talk to my son. Most people who do what I did never get that glimpse. I'll be grateful for it as long as I live. But I want to say to anybody out there pouring themselves out for some kid and never seeing the result, it's working. You may never get the glimpse I got. The seed still becomes the tree. In soil, you'll never get to see. That's the deal. You plant it anyway. I think about that night in the ring all the time, about how the entire arena looked at me and saw a joke, a soft nobody who didn't belong, somebody to laugh at. And about how not one of those 12,000 people had any idea that the nobody in the polo shirt was the reason the king they'd paid to see existed at all. The most important man in that whole arena, the man without whom there was no champion, no show, no nothing, was the one they were laughing at. The world is so quick to laugh at the quiet ones, the ordinary ones, the ones who don't look like much. And it has no idea, most of the time, that it's laughing at the very people holding the whole thing up. There are Otis Greers everywhere, is what I've come to understand. In every champion's story, in every successful person's life, there's somebody back at the beginning who believed in them when there was no reason to, who fed them, who locked a door one night, who refused to let them throw themselves away, and the world almost never knows those people's names. They don't get the belts or the spotlights or the microphones. They just quietly make the champions and then disappear back into their small, ordinary lives, asking for nothing. They are the most valuable people in the whole story, and they are the most invisible, and that is one of the great quiet injustices of this world. Every belt that gets lifted, every stage that gets walked across, every success the world stands up and cheers for, there's an invisible person somewhere who made it possible, and who nobody will ever name. The champion gets the roar. The man who fed him gets the silence. I got, for one strange and holy night, to be the exception, to be the invisible man the crowd finally saw. But I think about all the ones who never get that night, and my heart aches for them. And I made a decision in that ring that I'd spend the rest of my life pointing at them, so that at least some of them get named. So this is what I want to leave you with. Somewhere in your life there is an Otis Greer. There is somebody who believed in you before you'd earned it, who saw something in you when you couldn't see it in yourself, who said the right words at the right moment and changed the whole direction of your life and probably has no idea they did it. A teacher, a coach, a neighbor, an aunt, somebody. Picture them right now. I'll bet a face came to mind before I even finished the sentence, which tells you that you already know exactly who yours is, and that some part of you has been meaning to say something for years. And I'd bet you've drifted from them, the way Andre drifted from me, not out of meanness, but just out of life. Don't wait 17 years. Don't wait until you stumble back into them by accident in some arena. Go find your Otis Greer while you still can, and tell them what they did for you. Tell them you know. Tell them you remember. It will mean more to them than you can possibly imagine, because the people who shape us when we're nobody so rarely ever get to hear that it mattered. Go down to the comments and tell me about yours. Tell me about the person who believed in you when nobody else did, who saw you when you were nobody. Say their name. Let's give those quiet, invisible, world-holding people their due, even if it's just here, even if it's just for tonight. They've earned it 10 times over.